the knowledge and the availability of the varieties of cannabis that are out there, and with the main goal of preserving the current diversity of cannabis that we see now for future generations. And so it's exciting to be here. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. And maybe Jesse, you can introduce yourself from a breeder's hat. Put your breeder's hat on.
I'm gonna keep the regenerative hat on too.
Give them both on. You gotta have a couple hats.
Yeah. Well, I think
rain out.
With cannabis, we really get away from the seeds for a while. Like it's such a clone-dominated production world. As an artist, I guess I was never really interested in doing what other people were doing. I always wanted to do something different. So I think maybe that was part of where I got really interested in seeing what happens with the combination of different things and growing something that hasn't been grown before, and letting the plant create something that might help you or do something specific for maybe someone else in your life. There's something really special with the relationship of having multiple generations of plants and knowing their the multiple generations, their parents, their grandparents, and watching this evolution and finding the different things that are special in different ways. And I just find it fascinating. As far as regenerative techniques too, I think seeds are a really, really important part of that, because you don't need the mother rooms, you don't need the pest control. It's a very monocropping type world with straight clone production that you don't have with seeds. And then when you start breeding at a location, then you are taking that environmental and biological intelligence of the weather systems, the biology in the soil, and the plant learns and it will pass those on. So I like to just encourage everyone to, putting the breeder hat on is kind of weird, just like saying you're a breeder. Not like, I kind of want everyone to be at a point. Like, I don't think it's something just for like an elite crew, although like there's some of us work really, really, really hard at it and make a lot of stuff, and it's a lot of labeling, and it's a lot of running through stuff and paying attention. That it's just a special relationship, and so I love making seeds and making them available to people.
And Jason, I wanted to follow up with what we discussed on the phone. Is Jesse alluded to that. He said explicitly he wants everyone to have a breeder hat, and maybe you can speak to the importance of sharing the knowledge and teaching people how to fish, and then also in preservation work too, that we're all kind of contributing to this, because not only one person or a select few can do this work and do it justice.
Yeah, I like teaching folks how to fish. You'll eat for a lifetime. You
right.
feed them a fish and they'll eat for a day. But cannabis has been illegal for decades in the United States and around the world, and it's had a unique effect on the diversity of the plant, where we've seen agricultural crops go through a transformation over the past 100 years of everybody's grandparents and great-grandparents were growing their own crops. There was a lot more people in the United States on farms and family farms growing unique varieties. And we have undergone this shift to big agriculture and monocropping, you mentioned. And it reduced the diversity of most of our food crops, where we went from something like 3,000 varieties of apples in the United States to, I think we're around 30, under 30. This is the same with blueberries, with raspberries, with, you name it, the potato, the varieties of plants, edible plants have been reduced drastically, and it's because we're not farming things ourselves anymore. We're going to the store and buying somebody else's produce, and the folks that are producing large amounts for profit for sale at supermarkets, they've got some points in mind. They want yield, they want something that's uniform, they want something that's looks nice, that tastes good, and it reduces the variety that people are willing to grow because they've got a bottom line that they have to cater to. And with cannabis, we're entering this new era, and I hope that we're able to preserve some of the variety that we've had available. We've had small family farms, however they were illegal, but that's what they were. There were people growing in their backyards, growing in their basements, growing, in far away in the mountains in hidden gardens, and they had unique tastes and desires, and also out of necessity they had to produce their own seed because it was something that was illegal. You couldn't just go to the store and pick up plants. You had to know somebody or make your own. And now that we're entering legalization, and I feel in a lot of ways cannabis has become more illegal this since we've had passage of Prop 64. It's much harder for somebody with a small farm to overcome the hurdles that have been created with the new law. And we're going to see monocropping and big ag come in, and it's happening far faster than anybody could have even imagined. There are huge groups that are vying for position in this new economy, and the same things that happen to potatoes and apples and raspberries are going to start happening to cannabis. They're going to be concerned with yield. They're going to be concerned with THC percentages. They're going to be concerned with the look of the bud, and that's going to narrow down the number of varieties that these groups are willing to grow. They're not going to grow your long flowering sativas or these rare heirloom varieties that don't yield as well, or something that might not have that perfect smell or look. And it's my hope that we don't lose all those other varieties. And that comes back to the people, where we have to teach people to grow their own. And thankfully we're allowed to have personal gardens with Proposition 64. Other states have passed legalization laws where they don't allow people to grow their own plants. They're only allowed to buy it at the store. And that is certainly going to reduce the diversity of the cannabis varieties we see. So luckily we can grow our own plants, and hopefully we're going to teach folks to make their own seed. And one of the things I recommend to people that are interested in growing their own seeds are a little better mic here. Seeds like a day like today. It's rainy outside, and this would be a bad day to jar your seeds up. You want to dry seeds. It's a process called desiccation, where you reduce the moisture content of the seeds after harvest, and once the moisture content is down to an acceptable level, then you're able to actually jar up your seeds, and you want to put them in something like a mason jar where ambient humidity from the air cannot enter the seed. And so you get it down to a very low humidity, then package them up and put them in a cool, dark place where they can be preserved for years. If they're preserved with a lot of moisture in them, they're going to have a much shorter lifespan, and so that's something that's true for all seeds. The USDA has done a ton of studies on various species of plants, and they found that the drier the seed, the longer the seed lives. And so in desert climates, folks that preserve their seeds just out in the open in bags, the seeds live much longer than if you lived in a tropical climate where there's constantly fluctuating humidity. And so get your seeds dry, and wait for a day that's really dry, and it's easy somewhere in Santa Cruz. We have some pretty dry days, and today isn't one of them. But just a little humidity meter in your house. There's a lot of thermometers have that, and package your seeds up into a mason jar on a day that's very dry, and you're gonna have long living seeds. And it's very easy to make cannabis hybrids. There's a male and female plant, and a female plant can produce thousands and thousands of seeds, even small ones. And so we're allowed to grow 6 plants per adult in California now. And if you were to grow 6 females of different varieties and pick a male to pollinate those varieties, you could have an incredible amount of seeds for yourself and to share with others. So So that's
Excellent.
a little bit.
Talk a little bit about maybe the art of selection.
Sounds good. Yeah, but to add to that, definitely
Please, yeah.
dry, yeah, cold, dark. That's gonna give you the longest preservation. I live in an area where there is no such thing as a dry day, so a dehumidifier in a small room is a useful tool for anyone putting away seeds.
Last Coast.
Yeah. So actually, let's get into art and actually bigger picture. To add to what you were talking about, I guess I try to be big picture optimist with a lot of things. As disgusting as prohibition was, maybe it was an important moment for the cannabis plant, although, there's all these people in jail and all of the horrors and the families that were destroyed by this evil idea of making a plant illegal, especially a sacred medicinal one. But maybe it just had to go underground for the Green Revolution. And now that we're figuring things out again and understanding our relationship with nature and how agriculture can be a part of that, that maybe this is the time for cannabis to be fully out in the open. I'm also no fan of Proposition 64 at all. I really love the work that was done in creating the Compassionate Care Act, and Miss Dennis, we're gonna have this memorial on tomorrow at 5. Yeah. But what he did for us was really, really important, and the activists with him during the AIDS epidemic. People were in pain and they needed relief, and cannabis was able to provide that. And so these people risked their lives going to jail to help create, compassionate care for these people, and then also to develop a legal defense for, the heroes that were trying to provide this medicine. And then that gave birth to a completely, our whole economy in Humboldt County, a very special community where we can. And also here as well, I grew up in Santa Cruz Hills. Yeah. I started with seeds from the Santa Cruz area too. It was just a very interesting time for Prohibition because people are pulling seeds from all over the world. Surfers traveling the world and smuggling them back, and so breeding with Afghans and African and doing different Colombian Mexican hybrids. Gave birth to a lot of really cool stuff, and then those things being developed in these different environments. Different parts of the hills or coastal. That would be different and better for that particular environment. And then we start to see different chemotypes being developed from those two that have lots of different healing properties. And by chemotype, I mean the cannabinoids, the THC, the CBD, and the diverse terpenes, which are huge. Cannabis is actually the most phytochemically diverse plant on the planet. And it's also incredibly adaptive and fast at changing, at becoming something else that we might want. It's kind of similar to breeding dogs in a way where, we get something like a wiener dog or a shepherd or a border collie that can understand commands. But like cannabis, all of a sudden it's like, oh, you need CBD? Well, I can produce a bunch of it. Oh, you need a little bit of osmine with that? Well, I can do that. Oh, you need some pinene and lemon? I know. Well, you need it in this very specific combination. You need these hundreds of different compounds in this different. I can do that. Like cannabis is very good at. It's a mutualistic relationship. We evolved together over thousands and thousands of years, and we were breeding for a long time. And I'm breeding off the work of tens of thousands of years of work. Like people were breeding amazing stuff in the Hindu Kush region and Africa and all over the planet. And that were specific, maybe good for that community, good for that environment. And so we see these larger or squattier types that do better for the moisture, the pH in the soil, the dryness, the heat, but also what we want as people, what is healing to us. Because that's the plant. Like, oh man, that smell. This might be healing for me, and then that effect. That's what I want. So let's breed with that one again. And these two together might make something even more useful for a different ailment. But we have now we have more tools. Now we have the labs. Now we have the chemotype tools where we can actually get a chemical analysis of what we have and actually know what's there. Hopefully it's a reliable lab. And we also now have the genotype information, with Phylos and starting to do the mapping. We have this 3-dimensional scatograph of more and more people that are providing their genetic information. they're basically able to create a pinpoint in a three-dimensional space based off of the data collected from that DNA and assign a position to it, and then we can see what is more or less related, what belongs to this Kush group or maybe a more heirloom group. And then we can also look at the genetic diversity. We can look at the stability, and we can look at the plants that might be the most genetically different if we want to create more diversity, or the things that are more similar, depending on which path we want to go down. But really, it's an infinite toolkit that's at our hands for developing medicines. We have the most phytochemically diverse plant on the planet that wants to give us exactly what we want, and now we have the chemotype and genetic tools to progress in that. So I'm kind of thankful that this is the moment that cannabis is coming out, and I'm trying to keep that big picture optimism.
Do you want to harp on that a little bit?
Well, I completely agree. I am amazed by the diversity that is found in cannabis species. It's incredible. It goes far beyond sativa and indica, and there's actually some debate about whether those terms even make sense. Where sativas they've done genetic mapping and found that most sativas actually originate in India, and so they could actually be called indica. And indicas largely originate in Afghanistan, so they would more correctly be called Afghanica. So there's it's going to take a long time to turn that ship around, because everybody's learned indica, sativa, but the diversity goes far beyond that. There are unique varieties all across Africa. There's the Durbans, there's Malawi. We've seen seeds out here and in Santa Cruz. There's so much seeds just seem to make their way here from all over, and I've seen plants from Ghana. I've seen U.S. service members bringing back seeds from Iraq and from Afghanistan. I've seen the most beautiful plants grown out of some of those varieties. And, from Southeast Asia, we've had Thais, and we've had Vietnamese plants, and we've had, our South American varieties, Colombians, and also beyond Colombia, there's a number of other areas in South America that have unique varieties, but that's one of the most well-known. We've seen varieties from Jamaica, where Jamaica seems to be kind of a crossbreeding section, where things ended up in Jamaica from all around the world, and then they developed something very unique out of all of that crossbreeding. And in the United States, in the turn of the century, there was a number of pharmaceutical companies doing breeding projects in the United States and also in Mexico. And they were creating cannabis tinctures, and that went into things that were purely cannabis products, but also into patent medicines, where they're throwing everything under the sun in there. And it actually those projects increased the diversity of Mexican cannabis, where Mexican cannabis is known to be some of the best in the world, and also very diverse because of some of the pharmaceutical companies' breeding projects that took place down there. Hawaii and also Big Sur were two of the early places in the United States that were known for cultivating cannabis. The effect of all of this crossbreeding has led to just a rainbow of variety that we have available. And it's just interesting how many different areas of the world have had their own cannabis cultivation, and cannabis adapted to those environments and developed a plant that was able to thrive in a host of different climates and regions across the world. And in California, we seem to be world renowned for some of the best cannabis on the planet, and it's because we have so many aficionados of this plant that people just had to collect them all, and so we did, and folks brought their seeds from across the globe and created some of the most well-known hybrids. I mean, you could go anywhere around the world, and if you get into cannabis circles, you talk about Humboldt or you talk about Mendocino. People in Europe know what Humboldt and Mendocino are. If they're people that know about cannabis, and if you say you're from those regions, they want to know how their cannabis matches up to what you've seen in your lifetime. And it's a beautiful community, and I know we have a long way to go with the legality of this plant, and I feel confident that we're going to be able to break through to a new era of legalization where the laws actually make sense and are actually fair and equitable to all individuals that would enjoy being part of this economy that's being created. And we have some ideas. We want to start doing some seed swaps. We've been talking about that locally, where folks can share their seeds. I've been hearing about this elsewhere in the country. Actually, Washington D.C. is doing seed swaps. They've been doing it for a couple years now, and so it's a wonderful opportunity for people to bring what they have and share it with others. And I think it harkens back to an earlier time where folks were swapping and sharing everything they had because that's all they had. It was the only access point. Exactly. Yeah.
Bringing back the heirloom, bringing back small farms, and those seed exchanges, those proprietary regional genetics that were stewarded to the Santa Cruz Mountains and the Lost Coast, and going south to Big Sur and even Topanga Canyon. These are legendary areas in our state that have really unique terroirs and appellations, and that's going to be developed, especially as a craft cannabis community like Santa Cruz, because we are the second smallest county in the state. So we do have a very unique opportunity to bridle all the diverse regions that are across the county, from where the Santa Cruz Mountains meet the sea. But even when you start going south, Strong Agronomy, that group we just had, they were talking about how South County is just another breadbasket comparable to Salinas Valley. So you both have very well-known seeds, and they are highly acclaimed in the growing community. I want to hear an experience, like a testimony of maybe one variety that comes to mind, a special cross that you stewarded, and just give our audience the step-by-step kind of process that a breeder goes through.
Well, I was gifted a very special Malawi variety from a very dear friend, and the hybrids that were created, and so an F1 hybrid is where you take two very different plants from different gene pools and cross them together, and the first generation between the offspring of those two very different plants is called F1. And so if you take those seeds that you created and then you cross those seeds to one another, you're basically making crosses between siblings. That would be called F2. And then if you make a cross between those sibling seeds, then that's F3 and F4. And so a lot of the varieties I've been creating are F1s. And I feel like there's something magical about F1 hybrids, where they display a certain vigor that comes from their genes are heterozygous versus homozygous. And homozygous is where you have alleles that match, and heterozygous is where you have opposing alleles, ones that are different genes. And when things are heterozygous, you are much more likely to have dominant genes come into the phenotype and actually show themselves in the plant, in the way the plant grows. And these Malawi crosses, there was one we called OG Malawi Dog, and it's one that I still get emails from people about, and it was an OG Kush Chem Dog crossed to this Malawi, and there was just something about it. The Malawis are very stretchy and they like to get tall, and the OG Kush is a variety that a lot of people have fallen in love with for its flavor and its aroma and its potency. And the Malawi also added something to the mold resistance of the plant. And it was just a perfect marriage where those plants just seemed to thrive, especially in Santa Cruz in our coastal environment. And so that certainly was,
That's
was
perfect.
what I would mention.
One of our live streamers asked about a variety that would grow in the coastal region, so there you go.
Yeah, I actually want to go back to seed exchanges for a moment too. And
Please.
I met you briefly at the Cali Debt Fest a few years ago, and you gifted me the strawberry with the Malawi, and thank you for that. I appreciate that kind of sharing. And the hybrid vigor of that first round, it's really awesome, and it's just so much fun to see like how these things go together. And for me, actually, after the F1, I dropped that and I start calling them BC, just back crosses, or BX, sometimes BC if I use a clone variety to continue an exact one. Coastal varieties, the Big Sur Holy Weed was a really, really cool one for this area. That's definitely bred a lot of really cool resistance and stuff. But sometimes, all you have to do is just breed in your location and stuff starts to happen. And there's a lot of different strategies for mold resistance too. It's not just necessarily the vigor, although that's really important, and the resistance, but the timing too. I'm in an area where there is a point where it's just going to get way too wet at the end of October, and you can't have something going into November and have anything survive, no matter how strong it is, possibly. So, sometimes you need to think about when something finishes too. But the super early stuff, it doesn't have that full time to maybe produce as much or come to the same fruition. Although I do like a lot of those September finishers too. Black Dog is one I'm pretty well known for because we have that with Humboldt's seed organization, and it's in over 50 different countries, and it's super fun. Someone sent me a picture from Uruguay with some growing, and last spring I was getting pictures from, and actually now too, from Australia. So it's pretty cool seeing flowering plants, when you're getting ready to start propagating and stuff, stuff finishing on the other side of the sphere from seeds that, had very humble beginnings in little places, in your backyard or wherever, all of a sudden find their way all around the world. And then people doing their own things with it, finding something that they like there and crossing it, and then that gets to continue on in their location. And I'm not one of those breeders who think, oh, that's mine or whatever. No, because all the other stuff that I used, came from somewhere else, and that came from somewhere else. So yeah, please, go to crazy, make something better with anything you get from any of my seeds, or our seeds. And seed exchanges are super important. We actually just had a really awesome one for Emerald Cup family at the Area 101 is where the Emerald Cup started. Super small though, and a lot of really great breeders. We have Mean Gene and Mr. Bob Hemphill and CSI, some pretty well-known companies and names. As well as just people coming from the hills and pulling out some gorgeous, stuff that they've been working on forever, and just sharing everything as well as every type of seed. What are the companion plants that we want to be working with? What different veggies are going to be good in different areas? And actually, people are really good about even including on their veggies what would be good for different locations. This will be really good coastal. This is more for the hills. That was a really special community event because it was open, but it wasn't there's no fee. It's not it wasn't put out there super public, but it was open for anyone to come and exchange. It was very rich. And especially in the post 64 days, it was really nice to have that. We all were just we need this with all this regulation and crap that we're dealing with. A real kind of more Grange style thing instead of the town hall meeting complaining about overtaxation and regulation, and that is crushing the small farmers. I'm very concerned actually about the distribution model and the batch testing and that losing the diversity because you grow a plant from seed. That particular plant is kind of special on its own, and I like keeping those batches separate, because there would be a very unique quality to that one, even though they're like chemotypes potentially or similar. There's going to be different special aspects of it. we just did these blue dinos crossed with the Canadog, which is a canatonic black dog. That had I took a male selection, or actually a couple that I really liked. Both tested at what I wanted. I was looking for 3-to-1 CBD THC with the certain stem rub that I wanted as well, and put that onto a few different things. But one of the ones was a blue dino, another CBD variety, and ended up with pretty consistent 3-to-1s as well, around 16% CBD and like 4% THC. But there's some really interesting stuff going on with the terpenes, and one of the ones I tested had 1.77% osmine, which is actually a very rare terp. And so far, I haven't seen. I've asked a few labs and multiple breeders. I haven't seen cannabis ever produce that level of that terpene before. I'd be interested if you know any. There's definitely a few that have good little spikes, but that particular terpene has its own aspects to it. There's antiviral, there's anti-inflammatory properties to that particular terpene. That is important. And then also we're dealing with a lot of new types of products now, and a lot of people make distillates, and then terpenes are actually reintroduced into the cannabinoids that have been separated, and you kind of re-engineer the flavor of something for those vape pens. Well, osmine's a really expensive terpene, so most people leave it out. So having cannabis that produces a large level of that could be very useful. So like just trying to be adaptive to thinking out beyond the normal, we just want a really high THC, we want it to look a certain way. There's a lot of aspects to industry where we can be filling, and medicine where we can be filling niches by breeding for something, instead of doing all this, the plant might just produce it perfectly altogether, instead of us separating everything and re-engineering and doing all of this work. We can do it through breeding and be very innovative in the products that we're making.
Excellent. You mentioned Canadog, and I do want to discuss with diverse cannabinoid profiles. My experience with CBD seeds, they're not all rich in CBD, and something to consider about the Mendel's Punnett squares, and understanding a bit of how genetics work, even though both parents might have blue eyes, or what, there's not, odds are, there's a 1 in 4 chance you're going to get what you want. And there's a lot of emphasis on the non-intoxicating cannabinoids in the post-64 era, because there's a lot of adult users that are interested in it and are curious about cannabis, but are also kind of cautious and apprehensive about the psychoactivity and the intoxication that comes with THC. So can you speak from, breeding for CBD or those kind of desirable, less intoxicating varietals?
Yeah, it gets pretty interesting. A lot of times if you take a high THC and a high CBD, your F1s are going to have, some that are pretty high in CBD. You're going to have 1-to-1s, 3-to-1s. You might have a random 20-to-1 or 1-to-20. They're going to sometimes throw back and forth. Every once in a while, though, it ends up like, whoa, every one is relatively consistent, and I don't totally understand that yet. We can go with Mendel's matrix and look at dominant and recessive genes and understand kind of. But wait, what aspects of cannabis is dominant, recessive? Have we done all of the? Do we know everything? Like which terpene would be that, until we really start doing the analytics. And analytics is also economically prohibitive at the scale that I would love to be doing it. If I just was able to freaking test everything, I could start writing a lot of this, really actually paying attention to what we're seeing when we put these combinations together. So we're just kind of at that moment where we can really dive off and do something much more extreme, but we also need to be able to pay for the exorbitant testing. I was lucky enough to grow some cannabis. I was able to trade for some good testing too, because it was good enough for them. But that was that was really good to have a lab call you up and be like, yeah, we look at cannabis all day, but we don't like it. Can you bring your flowers? And we're like, yeah, but I just want testing. And then we get to and then the being able to talk with your labs and learn what they're seeing. Use that resource of you know, a lab that really, you know, looks at this and knows the stuff, and what they're seeing, you know, when they have a certain profile or when certain things are put together. And the more communication that happens between breeders, labs, patients, dispensaries, the more we're going to be able to evolve quickly and produce some really unique medicine.
Yeah, the to add to that, the era of testing has just begun. Really, we haven't been doing very much genetic testing or THC testing earlier than maybe 10 years ago. Is really when it started. Previously, laboratories wouldn't test cannabis. It was 1996 we had medical cannabis law passed, but not until about 2009, 2010 did somebody come up with the idea to actually create a cannabis testing laboratory where regular testing laboratories for all sorts of other things wouldn't touch cannabis. And so you bring them a cannabis sample and they say, no, that's federally prohibited. We're not allowed to have that in our facility. And so somebody came up with the idea of let's create a cannabis testing lab that specifically caters to this industry. And from there, the doors were opened, and we were able to start testing all sorts of varieties. That's when we started to really see more CBD varieties come onto the scene, when people were actually starting to pay attention to the chemical composition of the cannabis that they were consuming. And we've now identified over 100 cannabinoids, and so a little background: cannabinoids are things like THC, CBD. These are chemically related compounds created by the cannabis plants, and a few of them are found elsewhere in nature, but primarily they're found in cannabis. And the terpenes are the aromas. They're other chemicals that are also created by the cannabis plant that are found all over in nature. And cannabis is unique because it creates all sorts of terpenes that are found in lavender, in oranges, in all sorts of plants all over nature, and also in conjunction with these cannabinoids. And so a lot of the testing is related to cannabinoid content, and they'll give you the different ratios of all the different cannabinoids. Most of them are very high in THC, some are high in CBD, but the other 100 or so cannabinoids are mostly found in minute quantities. There's another one that's sort of coming on the scene now, and a lot more research is going into THCV. But there are many, many others. And that is what is so important for creating a space for people to be able to breed and save rare varieties. It seems the older varieties you look at, the more of a chance you're going to have where you find something unique, a unique cannabinoid or a unique terpene. And so monocropping is kind of at odds with the search for the medicinal values of this plant, where these new cannabinoids and these new terpenes that people are finding in the cannabis plant have unique medicinal properties. And it's just fascinating to see how much variety and diversity is out there, and the testing has gone a long way to show us what's really inside this plant. And maybe 3-4 decades ago people would smoke something and say, oh, well, that one doesn't give me as much of an effect, and so I'm not going to grow that one next year. And that's what led to almost all cannabis being high THC, is because when people consume it, they say, this one's stronger than that one, so we're going to breed with this one, and these other ones, they get dropped off out of the list. And now we're finding, some of those other varieties that were not as potent actually have their own medicinal qualities, and CBD is one of those cannabinoids that it doesn't have a psychoactive effect, but it's known to have a number of properties that are beneficial. And it's amazing to see the variety that we are starting to find with these cannabinoids, and there's a ton of research that's going into cannabis, and it's very prohibitive. Yes, to actually be able to do this research, tests are quite expensive, and that's not all we're testing for. We're also testing for mold. We're also testing for, unfortunately, pesticides, where it's been known that a number of unscrupulous producers have been using a whole host of chemicals on their plants to get them to either yield more. There's actually chemicals that can make a bud grow larger. There are chemicals that can stop mold from growing. There are chemicals that can kill all sorts of pests that you find on these plants. And the pests have unfortunately started to become more of a problem, especially with clones being passed around. Where a clone is a tiny sample of a plant where you cut a branch off and you get it to root. And they are notorious for passing bugs and other pathogens from garden to garden. And the bugs are getting more resilient and resistant, much like we've seen in agriculture, where superbugs, as some people have called them, have started to be created, where they become more and more chemically resistant. And now that we're testing, folks are starting to see what was under the curtain, and it's not always pretty. Sometimes we're finding all sorts of chemicals that you wouldn't want to be ingesting on cannabis, and it's a blessing to be able to have that information now and to be able to actually do the testing to let you know, or let say a dispensary purchaser know what do they want on the shelf. And now there's actually one of the good things about 64 is we've got laws in place now that prohibit certain chemicals from being on cannabis and then sold on over the counter. And that's one of the consumer protections that I'm very happy to see. So testing is really important, and I'm happy that it's part of our industry now.
Cool. We're right at the top of the hour. I want to give both of you some final words and some things, some seeds for the audience to marinate on. And we'll go ahead with Jesse.
I wanted to touch on the different cannabinoids real quick too.
Of course.
THCV has some very exciting properties, and also it helps inhibit appetite as well. When most cannabis is actually increasing it. So for some people that might be really useful, as well as some other really important medical qualities. But there's a lot of cannabinoids, and I just want to put some of them out there that are being tested. No lab's really doing all of them. That's not happening because it's way too expensive, and hopefully as we progress we'll be able to test more and more. But CBG is like the precursor of a lot of these cannabinoids. CBN, there's CBC. THC, THCV, and there's a THCA, which turns into the Delta 9, which is what we know as the psychoactive THC. But THCA on its own, until it's decarboxylized and loses that acid, that's actually it's not
doing
psychoactive.
A good segue. We're going to talk about raw cannabinoids next panel.
And that's
stay tuned.
Yeah, the THCA does a lot of really important things in your body, pain relief, without it actually affecting your psychoactive, doing anything psychoactive in your brain. So that's really important to a lot of people who don't want to get high, but they need that cannabis relief for a lot of different pains. And as far as like testing as pesticides, seeds, you start from a new beginning. You're not taking those pathogens that you might have taken from that clone. The PM the powdery mildew is passed on. You could bring mites, whether it's russets or broads or spiders or thrips and other things. Those easily pass on. But there's systemic pathogens like powdery mildew, as well as potentially viruses that are all adding to ailments to that plant. And then we have to do all these extra things to try to support something. But when you crack a seed, you're starting new. You don't, unless you start it in a room with a bunch of sick clones, you're not. There's no mites inside the seed. There's no powdery mildew in there. It starts new, so you get that chance to give it a fresh, new environment and grow something pure and beautiful that came from something that you had a real relationship with that plant. Mm-hmm. You were part of the evolution of the plant and us. We have co-evolved together, and breeding is part of that.
Every seed's a prayer.
This has been a wonderful opportunity to talk to everyone, and so a few parting words I'll say to all the people in the industry that are worried about what's going on now with Proposition 64 in the New World. I'm right there with you guys. I'm a cannabis seed producer, and like many of you, I haven't made a sale since January 1st, and I don't own land, and I'm not permitted right now. And so I'm right there with a lot of these folks that are worried, and they don't know where they're going to fit into this new thing. And so I'm hopeful that we're going to make progress on paving a path for small producers to actually be able to be a part of this thing that they helped create. And to all the folks who are not looking at being part of the industry but do like to enjoy cannabis, I implore all of you to learn the techniques of creating your own seed, and hopefully with these seed swaps we're going to be able to share some of these genetics with a wider portion of the population, and teach some of these techniques so that we can preserve the variety of cannabis that's available today for the future generations. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. That's our breeders panel. Can we take a quick family photo before you guys go?
Can I ask that we have a quick question?
Yeah. You can take. Yeah.
Maybe, Jason, this for either for you. You mentioned the seed from Malawi, which I assume is African and very dry. You mentioned Iraq. The plant is so adaptive and widely distributed around the globe. Is there any chance that they could be grown in dry conditions? I mean, like, are there any home permaculturists right now who might be dry farming? Climate scientists right now are saying that California may have permanent drought since the Arctic ice will be pretty much gone by the end of next summer.
Farms.
That
Look
is
them
an
up.
excellent question.
Yeah.
So for folks that couldn't hear, she was asking about varieties that might be well suited for dry farming. My family is actually I was raised in Virginia. My family's from East Texas, and that's exactly what they did. My father was a farmer, and they did dry farming, and it's very difficult. The varieties I found certain varieties that had incredible root growth, and there were some Nigerians that I got a hold of one year, and they just had every single one that I planted. Just the pot was absolutely just chock full of roots, even really big pots. And it was a modestly sized plant, and it just had intense root growth. And I don't know if anybody's been developing strains that are for dry farming, but the diversity of the plant tells me yes, that there's something out there, and that had been a thought that had crossed my mind, and it would be a worthy project for sure.
There's a precedent. Sunbolt, isn't that right?
Yeah, Sunbolt, yeah. Sunshine Johnson, she did a great experiment this year that worked out great. Definitely, seeds are the way to go for dry farming because they have a taproot that can dive down deeper than, clone's going to have a much more difficult time taking those adventitious roots and going down. It's not a taproot. And just seeds have that, and they will go straight down. Dry farming is it can be several different things because it's based off of your location. So if your water table is not that low, dry farming is not that big of a deal. You just put the plant in and maybe mulch over. There's other areas where actually not mulching and having some of that transpiration, if like the riverbed's close, there's definitely areas where they actually break up the soil and they allow that evaporation, and the plant is pulling that water straight from the soil. I kind of like the more covered soil mulching style a bit more. I do some wet dry farming, and the fact that I live in a really wet area and I don't need to water, so I don't know if that counts or not, but as long as the soil's like mulched well and very living, because the water capacity
Do nothing farming.
of living soil is way beyond like a store-bought dirt. A store-bought dirt in a pot, that's going to evaporate really quick. But if you're in the ground, you have a lot of carbon, you have a lot of living soil, you're going to have a much longer time before that plant runs out of water. And if that taproot is deep enough to that water, and if you have maybe done some permaculture strategies as far as taking that rain harvest, the rain that's hitting your property, and putting it to your cultivation zone and using your ground as the ultimate water tank, as well as having some other water tanks too, you were able to really help bring that water table up and create, and that living soil becomes a sponge that holds 9 times the amount of water as one that doesn't have a decent amount of carbon in biology.
Family photo.
So there's a lot of different techniques in dry farming.
That's our breeders panel. We have another panel. We're 5 minutes into it. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jesse. That was excellent.
That farm?
Awesome.
We're going to take a 2-minute break, just let everyone get the blood flowing, and then we're going to start a Cannabis for Wellness panel, which will cover some of these topics: non-psychoactive, non-intoxicating cannabinoids, raw cannabinoids, different types of delivery methods. So stay tuned. We'll be back in just a couple minutes.
What a horrible act of terrorism the U.S. government was doing. like getting like cultivators in Mexico, and then like people that kids that smoke it back here are just getting poisoned. Like, yeah, and find out if they got that straight on.